Tamra, you and I have spoke before, but I want to reintroduce you. It was a great conversation. We were talking about the pollinators a couple weeks ago. I have with me Tamra Reall, field specialist in horticulture at the University of Missouri Extension. And I get that all right, correct?
Yes, you did.
Okay. You have an extensive background with master gardening, pollinators, and urban entomology. Is that pronounced
Very
that correct,
good.
right?
Yes,
Okay,
you
there we
did.
go. So today the conversation that we're gonna have is really about kind of starting a garden, so being successful at starting a garden. And I know I have had a lot of trial and error over the last 7 years in my own, probably really 8 years, because I started at my old house, didn't work out so well there. I'm having better luck this year, but there's a lot of folks out there that I think had that same kind of struggle, especially with all the new gardeners that we have in the industry, or in the country now, with what coming off of COVID. Everybody's more into the gardens. Everybody's more aware of healthy foods and all the processing and chemicals and stuff that get used on non-organic, and people that are concerned about GMOs and all this and all that. But that's really sparking a lot of interest in people. Like, well, what can I do myself? So I guess if I was a newbie to gardening and I, asked you, say, hey, Tamra, I'm looking to start a garden, where do I even begin?
Great question. And that's a good time to start when you are just about to begin to ask questions instead of just going out all by yourself. You can do that too, but then it's all trial and error, and there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. So yeah, what I tell people when they say, okay, I want to start growing something, what do I do? And it kind of depends on what their experience level is. I mean, maybe you just need to get a pot, put soil in it, and then put some seeds in it, and just have that experience of growing something. But if you are going out into your yard and you want to install a garden, there are definitely some first steps you need to do, and that would be to really assess your yard. There's a lot of things that you need to take into consideration, like where's the shady areas in your yard? What areas get more sun than others? If you're putting vegetables in, they need 6 to 8 hours, and so you need an area in your yard that gets a lot of sun. And I'm also just going to say, don't make this the farthest away part of your house or your yard. A lot of people do that, because you also need to take into consideration, where do I get my water? Will my hose actually reach all the way out there? Do I really want to trek all the way out there to go and play in the garden? So things like that, very, very important. I can give you a whole list of everything that you want to take into consideration. But do you have any questions at this point?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of things that start running through my head right now about my own garden. So I know at my house, I have 2 gardens. I have 5 4x8 cedar boxes that are right outside the kitchen sink window, and the center ones is lined up on the window. And we've got 3 boys, so my wife is constantly in the kitchen feeding them. They're eating machines, and so like that was the most convenient. I ran a water line over to it, so the water line is right there. I can easily fence it in if I need to fence it in from the animals, whether it's raccoons or possums or even groundhogs. I've had groundhogs eat all the leaves off all my green beans. And then I have another garden, which is much less convenient on the other side of the house, and it's in the ground. And it's the one I struggle with the absolute most. And I think definitely you're suggesting starting with just a pot, if you've never done it before, to kind of put your toe in the water, if you will, is the most easiest way, because you can move the pot if you need to move it closer to a water source, or it's too far away, is make it more convenient for yourself.
Well, you just mentioned 3 different gardening types. So there's container gardening, which, like you said, you can move it to wherever you need it to be. There's raised bed gardens, where you have, like, right outside your kitchen, that you can fill with the kind of soil you want, and usually those are great gardens. They're a little bit higher, they have better drainage. And then there's the in-ground gardens. And so that's another thing that people really need to take into consideration. What kind of garden do I want to have? Anybody can have a garden. It can be on the windowsill, it can be on your deck, it can be in the ground, it can be a raised bed. I have all 3 as well. If you are going to put a garden in the ground, that takes even more consideration, because you need to get a soil test to find out what soil type you have. You might need to do some amendments as well. We tell people it all starts in the soil. So make sure that you know what you have, what's the pH, what's the soil type, what kind of drainage do you have. Those things are all going to affect whether or not you're going to have a successful garden.
And my grandfather, anything with plants, he says, before you even think about the fun, fluffy stuff and color and all that kind of stuff, you need to just do two things. Make sure you got good soil and make sure you've got good drainage. And I will say my in-ground garden is the most miserable garden that I have, just because one, the weeds are harder to take care of. It's harder to get anything to just, I mean, I planted a bunch of new stuff this year and I thought for sure it was going to be successful. The only thing that's really been growing well is my cucumbers, squash, pumpkins. I don't think I didn't do watermelon. And then I have beans and a couple different varieties of beans that are in the in-ground, because I had them in my above ground, but they got too tall and too leggy. So I want to try to put them in the ground to see if I could try it that way. So far, so good. The weeds, though, they're a battle in the ground.
Do you have, sorry, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Go for it. Yeah.
Well, first of all, did you have a soil test? And then are you using mulch to try and help suppress those weeds?
So no and no. I did not do it. So yeah, no, I did not do a soil test. I should, but I'm also the last. So here's what I use the excuse, as a lot of our listeners probably have, is, well, I just decided to do it last minute. And I've always had a garden. I ran out of time, so I just put it in the ground, took a chance on it. So yeah.
Oh, please don't even worry about it. Yes, next year, and I will confess, I'm getting a soil test this spring as well. So it's just it's something that we do recommend at first, but if you haven't done it yet, do it as soon as you can. Mm-hmm. So it's you do learn a lot about the soil that you have. It's really, you learn about the pH, the organic matter that's in the soil. And then if you get it through MU, there's lots of different places you can get it, but if you get it through MU, you learn what kind of phosphorus you have and potassium in the soil, calcium, and things like that. And if there's something out of whack there, then you know what you need to do to improve the soil. And that can spare you a lot of angst when you're like, why won't this grow? If it is just something as simple as that. And you can take soil samples to your local extension office, you can mail it into the soil lab, and it's not very expensive. It actually ends up being less than just throwing stuff at the soil to try and do it without
the time
knowing.
invested. Yeah, the time invested is something that I think a lot of people don't consider, the value of time, even if you are doing something fun that you want to do. So you make sure you get a good return on it.
Sorry for getting you in trouble here.
No, you're good. You're good. Hey, I just because I host this podcast doesn't mean that I'm the end all be all. We can talk landscape design and all that all day long. But when it comes to like annuals, a lot of perennials, and especially gardening, I know what I've been successful with, but that's like just scratching the surface of what could be if I applied myself a little bit more some of the different areas.
That's the same for all of us.
So speaking to the 3 different gardens, for anybody listening, just kind of clarify is that container gardening is probably the easiest, because you can go buy a pot, no matter what the size you want, and put soil in it and start, whatever you want to do. And you can make your garden easier because you can move it around, you can all those different types of things. You may yield less because obviously it's a much smaller area, and it's probably going to be more susceptible to drying out. So making sure that you can get water to it, more easily than, if you got an irrigation system, even a drip irrigation system, put it on roughly, a lot of containers would be maybe 10 minutes a day just to get a little drink of water every day, depending on what you have in there, what might be the easiest way to go about getting started. And then the raised containers, you can order the kits, or like I built them myself. You can do that, and then they're a little bit more permanent. And then obviously the in-ground garden was going to take a lot more. I think it's going to be a lot more expertise, a little more time in managing it, maintaining it, but definitely doable. I grew up, all we had, my grandfather, my father, all we had was in-ground gardens. So,
do you want to mention, if you do have it in-ground, this is just a little tip. Make sure you dial 811 if you're putting a shovel in the ground. Always check for utilities, because you are liable if you cut through a utility. And a lot of people don't think about that. They're like, I'm just planting a garden in my yard.
Yeah.
11.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just yeah. I mean, for anybody local here, we dig right in St. Louis, but I mean, yeah, before you put a shovel in the ground, it's definitely your responsibility to call to make sure that you have all your utilities, public utilities. They won't track your dog fencing, your lighting wire, your irrigation wire, but your cable, your electric, most cases, water and gas will be marked. So, great tip. That was great. So let's think about this in terms of the three different types of gardens. You talk about soil testing. But should you test the raised planters each year, or because through the years your crops are going to deplete nutrients in there? So I mean, I guess how viable is it for the raised gardens? Just the same?
Yeah, I mean, at first you have more control of what goes in, but unless you actually know if there's um, something on the package that lets you know what your soil that you're adding in has, you still don't know the pH, you still don't know a lot of information about it. So it is helpful just as a baseline. And then we recommend getting a soil test every like 3 years or so.
Okay. I mean, how is this more curious for me? Is how often do you see plants deplete, or how fast you see deplete the nutrients that are in the soil? I mean, obviously, it probably depends on what was there to begin with, but I mean, is it something that just for good measure you should always put new soil in, planting soil each year, or should you always amend it? Or I mean, again, I know it goes back to that to testing it, but what would you just off the cuff recommend?
Well, it really depends. I add more soil to my raised beds as they need it because it's pretty high in organic matter where I have, and so they do just kind of go down. So that's when I'm adding more soil to my beds. I do recommend every 3 years to test your soil. Uh, as for how fast the nutrients can be depleted, like you said, it really depends on the plants. There's some plants that are very high feeders, and they're going to deplete it pretty fast compared to others, like some of our leafy greens that might not deplete quite so fast. So it really depends. I can't really give you just.
No. I'm just curious. Watering. So watering. So I was supposed to have my irrigation installed back in January, February, and they didn't make it out to get that done. And I just want so bad to have drip irrigation in my raised planters. I've been lucky, or we've been fortunate so far. We've had cool weather, we've had an adequate amount of rain. So I've only watered my garden once so far this year. And I will say I've got the bluish green kale I have ever had. My lettuce is going nuts. I mean, I've got tomatoes volunteering from last year coming up everywhere in my yard, I mean, all over the place. So having a really good year with the raised planters. Again, not so much with the in-ground, but the raised planters are doing awesome. What would you suggest as the best method for watering a raised planter?
Well, it really depends on how much you want to invest. So if you already have a sprinkler system set up, you can use that. Though I really prefer not necessarily in-ground, but on-ground watering. So a, a drip irrigation system is really great. It is the more expensive version, but a nice kind of in between is a soaker hose. They're relatively cheap. You can get them from $10 to $20 for 25 to 50 feet. And you can just put that out there. And it actually puts a lot of water out there for relatively inexpensively. And you can put that on a timer and it works really well. I've done both. I've had both drip irrigations and I've had a soaker hose. And right now I'm choosing the soaker hose because it works for me right now. But yeah.
Yeah, so you talk about timers, and that's a great little tip. I know Hunter. There's a couple different versions up there, but Hunter's one I'm most familiar with. They actually have a little mini spigot controller that you can hook up to your spigot, and they have a single or a dual, and you can Wi-Fi it. So anywhere in the world you have Wi-Fi, you can program it for the different days of the week and how long, and all those different kinds of things for it, which is really cool. I mean, just to have that kind of flexibility at your phone. So, but yeah, I mean, that would be that, if you go to the big box store, whatever, grab the soaker hoses and then hook on something like that. You can order them online. It's a pretty cool little tool.
It is. And speaking of timers are great, but it's not exactly one. like you just program it and forget about it. It's like you said, this spring we had so much rain. And so you probably don't need to turn your hoses on just because then it's too much. So
Well, yeah, so if you have, if you have an existing irrigation system, something to look at if you don't have it is the Wi-Fi controller that syncs to the nearest weather stations from the airports that will self-correct and will actually reduce if you have the bells and whistles with it, like a flow meter, which tests how much water goes through your system. And if you're in different zones, go out or under that range, it shuts the whole system down and sends you and your contractor an alert, which is really cool. It can save you up to 70% of your water. That's your usage through the system.
I love that. That's what I need.
It's pretty cool. It's called HydroWise. Something we definitely recommend to all of our customers, and more people are asking for it. It's a pretty handy tool. But so what about fertilizing? So one thing I don't do this right now is I don't fertilize throughout the growing season or anything like that. But is that something you suggest that to be done, or if so, is there any kind of? I mean, obviously, depending on your soil test, but is there anything that you would suggest as kind of like a catch-all fertilizer?
Well, if you know what your plants need, and different plants are going to need different things, like your leafy greens, they're going to need more nitrogen. If you have a plant that has flowers in order to produce the fruit, they're going to need more of the phosphorus and potassium. And so you really need to know what you are growing, and then you can determine the fertilization needs. And with that, I would recommend, instead of trying to tell you every single kind of plant and what kind of schedule you need, I would recommend getting in touch with your extension specialist, or get on the extension website and look at the different guide sheets. We have a lot of information about individual type of plants, and so that can help you know what it is that your plants are going to need.
So you mentioned a couple of times. Do you have a specific website that people can go to just before? I don't want to forget to ask you at the end.
Yeah, I'll have to look it up. How about I send it to you and you put it in the description for the video?
We'll put it in the show notes, and we'll put it on, we'll do a post about it. But yeah, no, we'll
Perfect.
definitely do that. Yeah. So with gardening, I mean, they can also go to a couple different things besides growing vegetables and those types of things. A lot of people like to, like I mentioned, that center box I have is all wildflowers. I was looking for a wildflower mix that only got about 18, 20 inches tall, because last year I had these vines and tomatoes that got 4 foot tall and completely blocked the yard out from the window. And so, but we got such amazing flowers. Things have been in bloom for the last 5 weeks, and you can see new buds. I mean, I'm thinking this is gonna go for at least another 6-7 weeks. And the amount of hummingbirds and butterflies and moths and everything we've got to it. I mean, we even had a hummingbird that literally will walk with you in the window, just kind of move with you. It's the funniest thing, but it's kind of the cool things that it's actually your garden interacting with you instead of you interacting with it, which is kind of a neat concept. I mean, I'm sure it all does the same thing. Anything you do, soil and drainage. Anything with living, you're planting in the ground, soil and drainage is number one. But I guess, do you have any? If somebody was asking, okay, forget about the vegetables, forget about growing food, is there any certain plants that you would start with? I know in my head there are, because I know what I'm successful with and what I'm not, but I'm curious what you would say is, what would you suggest people start with? If they want to start, hey, I want to plant some, I'm not going to dive into annuals because that's not my expertise, but annuals or perennials that they would want to start with. I want to add some color to my yard. What would you suggest for spring color or summer color?
Well, again, I'm going to say it depends. What kind of conditions do you have? Are you more in the shade, or are you more in sunny areas? That's really going to depend. You'll get more flowers if you're in a sunny area. So if you want just an immediate pop and a lot of flowers throughout the season, you're going to have more annuals most likely. Perennials, there are a few that have flowers throughout the season, but generally their flowering season is a little bit more condensed. Like here, I have my black-eyed Susans. They're going to be more like in July through early fall. But there are a lot of annuals like petunias or geraniums or alyssum. There are a lot of things that'll bloom pretty much the entire season. And then the perennials, like I said, they're going to have more limited, but there's so many different kinds of perennials you can put in that if you're really thinking about it, you can have things in bloom the entire year. You just have to pick spring blooming and summer blooming and fall blooming. Oh goodness, for recommendations for all of them, there are so many. That's just not even fair.
There's a lot.
There are.
I'll go with what I've been successful with, and because like I said, I struggle with some things, and I do well with others. But it comes like the cone flowers, the echinacea, the rudbeckias, and I'm trying to think what else do I have in my yard as yarrow. I mean, those are some of them are natives and great color, especially some of the newer hybrids and newer varieties of them. They bloom longer, they bloom stronger, they're a little bit not as leggy, they're more compact. And then you mix in some of the native grasses, or it's like maybe prairie drop seed, and then have a backdrop of some of like the Shenandoah switchgrass or the blue switchgrass behind it to really get all this seasonal impact and movement. And to tolerate the heavy soils that we have here, or if you live in an area that's I'm not going to call them run-of-the-mill homes, but you have homes where they have the packages, these big subdivisions where there's all construction soil. And these are plants that you're going to be a lot more successful with. Catnip is one of the most easiest, impactful. Just keep water away from it, and you'll be fine, because they grow so great. In the shade, I live in the woods, and the deer are getting more and more confident. But I have been planting a lot of hostas, and I haven't touched them yet. But I'm waiting for the day to start seeing them, because I'm going to have to figure out something to keep them away. But all the hundreds and hundreds of varieties of hostas that are out there, what's really cool about them is you can split them. Most people don't understand that you can actually take a shovel and cut them in threes or in half or in fourths, depending on how big they are, and plant them again. You can do it in the middle of the summertime, and any time of the year, you're not going to hurt them. They're tough as nails. The only thing that really gets them is the deer and the rabbits. So if you can keep those two things away, you're usually pretty good. Some other things that we look at are, is like Japanese forest grass. We were up in, where were we at? Canada, and they had a hillside in the shade covered with nothing but Japanese forest grass, the all gold. I mean, it was the brightest ground cover I've seen in a dark area. It really just brightened the area. It was kind of a really dramatic effect. So those are some pretty cool things. In the shade, there's a lot more texture things you're going to do than you are, like you mentioned, flower wise, but you can still have the same effect of a great appearance with it. And again, all my opinion. And soil matters. Soil matters a lot. Bluebells, the Carex pennsylvanica is a great one. So again, those are my rants that I have a lot of success with.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, there are a lot of natives that are really good too that I enjoy. So like different asters, or there's one that I have, and I can't remember the exact name of it. They're little purple flowers that it blooms in the fall, and it's just the entire thing will be covered with these just absolutely beautiful little purple flowers, and it's so much fun. One thing to keep in mind: some of these plants can be a little more aggressive. You mentioned mint, and mint is beautiful, and pollinators love it, but it also can be very aggressive. And so putting something like that in a container is a really great way to enjoy the flowers, but also be able to keep it from taking over everything else.
100%. So IPM, integrated pest management. So we talk about all this color. You brought this up last time. I didn't bring it up last time. It's kind of a carryover note. Whether it is your garden, because we talked about some of the animals, the raccoons, the possums, and the groundhogs, but there's also the Japanese beetles, which will destroy, again, if you have beans, they're going to destroy those leaves as well. A number of other things that are out there. So I mean, what kind of things do you see negatively impact your pest-wise, your gardens? And just what are some things that you do to try to move them out or prevent them from causing any preventative damage to them?
Good question. So I think with IPM or integrated pest management, this actually starts before you put plants in the ground. If you put the right plant in the right place, trying to make sure that you're putting plants that are going to be successful wherever you put them. So that means that they're adapted to the soil, the light, and there are many plants that actually can be resistant to various diseases. Then there's the insects that can cause problems. There are some things that you can put that are barriers. So like if you put like a cloth over them, you can avoid some of those problems. Some plants obviously are going to need pollinators to come and pollinate, and so you have to be careful when you would cover them. But when we have the Japanese beetles, you're right. I mean, they can just be devastating. They can just eat everything. But take in mind with the plants that you are looking at, have they already bloomed? Are they already producing? What exactly are the beetles eating, and do you need to protect that, or at this point is it okay to just?
So yeah, so at the so at my house it's mainly the green beans, the leaves, and it's while they're producing. And
The source of the problem, resistant to them. So keep in mind that as these, I think we have a connection issue.
yeah, it's shaking out there a little bit. I don't know if it's mine or yours. Apologize.
Yeah, I apologize too. I can't tell.
But
What was your question?
No, so like yeah, so you mentioned what are they eating? So at my house, it would be like the leaves of the green beans. While the green beans just keep producing, they don't stop producing, they just keep going. That and the roses. I mean, there's really roses. And I have started taking my roses out because I have rosette at my house, and so I'm trying to keep the best roses and slowly switching out with other shrubs. But you know, in our garden center, we used to have a bad Japanese beetle problem until about a few years after we have this large barn, and all the I don't know the name of the birds. I think it's like a swallow, some kind of something, but they nest in the barn. And ever since we started getting a large population of them, the Japanese beetle population has been decimated here. We haven't seen them at our garden center since, which is kind of cool. But I guess that's kind of another maybe thing is right plant, right place. If you have a barn and it's in close proximity, you have the same kind of situation, might not be a bad idea to utilize Mother Nature as it's kind of living on the property.
That's so right, and that's one of the reasons why understanding IPM is really important, because it's more of a complete picture. And a lot of people can be very short-sighted. They're like, oh, there's a problem, I need to deal with this problem, but it actually creates a bigger problem. If you're spraying things on the plants, or this is a common question I get for Japanese beetle control. Can I treat for grubs in my yard? Well, you can, but that's actually not going to solve your problem, because Japanese beetles are really good flyers and they'll come in from miles away. Mm-hmm. And so keeping that in mind when you're looking at ways to treat, you just need to be careful and think big picture rather than just the immediate, oh, they're eating my stuff. When it comes to things like trees or roses, the leaves, they might completely defoliate the plant. But if you have a healthy plant, it can recover. So they're going to be okay. Just make sure that they're getting enough water and that they have the nutrients they need, and they really can recover even when it looks so bad.
So we covered a lot as getting started in the garden. Water, soil, drainage. Making it convenient for yourself, utilizing the property, especially when thinking about integrated pest management. Like, is there anything on the property that you can prevent by placing in the right spot, or by placing it in proximity to an area that might have, some elements that are going to help you prevent some of this? What have we missed so far? Anything we missed that comes to mind to you?
Yes. You also need to be aware of of what zone you're in. So if you are planting things, know that here in Missouri, we cover a lot of zones, and these are USDA hardiness zones. If you want something to last long term, make sure that you're planting something that can tolerate our winters, our cold temperatures, and also we're starting to look at how hot can they handle.
Mhm.
So just be aware of what zone you're in, and how that works. But don't let that keep you from trying something that you really want to try. We have a lot of microclimates around our houses too. There might be an area that stays a little bit warmer, so you can get away with something that's maybe a zone 7 instead of a
St.
zone
Louis,
6.
yeah, St. Louis is a great example of that. So anybody from 270 to downtown can usually can work on some of the warmer plants, prefer the more warmer plants, warmer zones than out west of there. And I will say a lot of times we always err on the cold hardiness side of it. We'd rather focus on the cold hardy than the warm, because we could always add water or create a different environment to help the heat side of it. But you can't never take the cold out of the ground. You can always put more water in the ground if it's hot, but that's where we always been living at it. So I know they changed the zones a few years ago, but we still err on the colder side when we're picking plants, because nobody likes to see burnt leaves and things died back all the way to the ground, and nothing sticks that don't come up till May or June, depending on how warm we get. And so try to offset some of those types of questions and comments that we might get if possible. So it also makes you feel more successful.
Just with that, like this spring was a good example with that really late cold snap. A lot of people lost plants. I know with my blackberries, I lost a huge percentage of my blackberries just because the cold affected them, but people lost plants too. So if it's a plant that you really, really want to have, maybe it's something that reminds you of a loved one or something, do make sure that you're going a zone 5 or whatever that lowest zone area is for you when you're planning, instead of making that your plant that's taking a risk.
Our finance manager and I, that night it got real cold, the 2 nights in a row, we were burning 20 55 gallon drums of wet straw to smoke our Japanese gardens and try to keep the frost out of them. And we did from 8 at night till 5 in the morning. And it was the longest night of my life. But I smelled smoke in my nose for literally 4 or 5 days. And but I mean, we were I would say we were about 80% successful. We had a handful that still got some frost on them. We didn't where we saw where we didn't have the good coverage on it, but yeah, it was a heck of a night to do that. But I mean, we had another freeze back in 2012, 13, or 14, where it got so cold it was like 80 degrees and snapped down to the 20s, and we lost about a third of all of our Japanese maples. They died back completely to the ground. All of our foster hollies on our farm died, and all of our southern magnolias died back to the ground as well.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it was nuts. Yeah, it was nuts. So, but yeah, so that's why I was like, I always err on the side of the cold, because we're notorious for getting these awkward cold snaps in the springtime. So I remember when I was a kid, it snowed in May 1st or something. When I was a little kid, that was some crazy snow that we had. So yeah, that's my advice. So
good advice.
Well, Tamra, where can people get a hold of you if they haven't listened to the last one yet? If they're new listening, where can they find you? Where can they get a hold of you? Where can they interact with you?
Well, if you Google my name, I will come up with MU extension. So I am at REALLT at Missouri.edu. You can also find me on social media. So I'm on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. And then also, not just me, but there are hotlines available if you have gardening questions. So Extension Master Gardeners are available. I know we have hotlines in Kansas City and St. Louis and in Greene County, Springfield area. So get a hold of Extension Master Gardeners as well. They can answer a lot of your questions for you.
Excellent. Yeah, it's always great talking to you. You're such a wealth of knowledge. I consider myself a novice in a lot of areas, and so it's great to just kind of hear the points. And I love the push. Well, are you doing this and are you doing that? Because I'm from the school of hard knocks. I do everything the hard way first, and then a couple of times before I do it the right way. So it's always nice. It's always nice to get the education of what I'm doing wrong, and every once in a while what I'm doing right. So it's good. So
you're doing a lot of good things, Anthony.
Karen, I really appreciate your time. I look forward to doing this again. I mean, it's always a great time talking to you. And again, I know our listeners are better gardeners for the conversation. So until next time, we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel.
Bye-bye.